The unexpected compliment. The spaceship Orion 7 slowly descended onto the alien planet Sci-fi. The atmosphere shimmered with a strange purple glow, and the land stretched out in sharp metallic ridges. Captain Jake Carter watched from the window, feeling a mix of excitement and tension. This was humanity's first official meeting with the Typhorians, a highly intelligent but mysterious alien species. Jake adjusted his uniform and stepped off the landing ramp, followed by his team. The Typhorians stood in a perfect formation, their insect-like bodies tall and covered in gleaming exoskeletons. Their 4 arms were folded behind them, and their glowing eyes showed no emotion. The leader of the Typhorians, Chancellor Zorvan, stepped forward. His voice was deep, metallic, and emotionless. "Welcome, humans. State your purpose." Jake took a deep breath. This was a delicate moment. Any mistake could ruin the entire mission. "We come in peace," he said, trying to sound respectful. "We wish to learn from your people and build an alliance." Zorvan studied Jake for a long moment. Then he nodded. "We shall speak." As they walked toward the grand hall, Jake observed the Typhorians closely. Unlike humans, they showed no smiles, no frowns, just stillness. Their city was silent, almost eerie. Everything was sharp, clean, and geometric. No art, no decoration, no music. It felt empty. Then he saw her. Among the Typhorians, one figure stood out. She was slightly smaller than the others, her exoskeleton shimmering with an unusual deep blue glow. The patterns on her shell almost looked like waves, shifting and reflecting light beautifully. Jake was fascinated. He had seen many aliens in his life, but something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way the light danced across her body. Maybe it was just instinct. Before he could stop himself, he smiled and said, "You're beautiful." The words hung in the air like a shockwave. Every Cyphorian froze. The silence was heavy. It pressed down on Jake like an invisible force. His team stiffened. He could feel their nervous glances. Oh no, what did I just say? The blue glowing Cyphorian, the one he had just complimented, let out a strange, high-pitched sound. It wasn't a scream, but it wasn't normal either. Then her glowing eyes widened, and before anyone could react, she collapsed to the ground. Jake's heart jumped. "Hey, is she okay?" He stepped forward, but 2 Cyphorian guards blocked his path. Zorvan's voice was suddenly sharp. "You have spoken the forbidden words." Jake blinked. Forbidden words? What was he talking about? His second in command, Lieutenant Ross, whispered, "Captain, I think you just made a serious mistake." Jake looked back at the fallen Cyphorian. The guards were checking her, but her body still glowed strangely. The other Cyphorians whispered in their alien language, their voices urgent and tense. The leader turned to Jake, his glowing eyes burning with something close to anger. "Human, you must come with us." "Now." Jake frowned. "Wait, can someone tell me what's going on? I just gave a compliment." Zorvan didn't answer. The guards moved closer, their weapons humming softly. Jake could see the tension in their bodies. His team reached for their own weapons, ready for a fight. This was bad. The mission was supposed to be peaceful, a first step toward friendship. But now, in just a few seconds, it felt like he had started a war. Jake raised his hands, trying to stay calm. All right. No need for weapons. I'll come with you." Zorvan gave a sharp nod. "Then follow." As they walked toward a massive, ancient-looking structure, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he had just unlocked something dangerous. He glanced back at the fallen Cyphorian. Her body still glowed faintly. Even unconscious, she looked alive in a way the others didn't. Who was she? And why did 3 simple words, "You're beautiful," cause this kind of reaction? Jake had no idea, but he was about to find out. An ancient prophecy. Jake Carter had seen many strange things in his years as an explorer, but nothing compared to this. He sat inside a cold, metallic chamber deep within the heart of the Typhorian capital. The walls pulsed with a faint blue glow, seemingly alive, as if the entire room were breathing. Around him, several Typhorian guards stood stiff and unmoving, their forearms resting on sleek, silver weapons. Jake's mind raced, replaying the last few moments. He had said 3 simple words, "You're beautiful." And in response, an alien had collapsed. What had he triggered? His team was in a separate room, held under protective observation, though Jake knew what that really meant, detainment. The Typhorians weren't taking any chances. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Chancellor Zorvan entered, followed by 2 other Typhorians. But Jake's attention was drawn to the figure in the middle. It was her, the Typhorian female who had collapsed. But she was different now. Her deep blue exoskeleton, which had once shimmered faintly, was now glowing, pulsing with waves of golden energy, like light trapped beneath the surface of a gemstone. Her stance was more upright, her presence more commanding. When she locked eyes with Jake, he felt something shift in the air, like the entire room was charged with invisible electricity. Zorvan spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. "Human, you do not understand what you have done." Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, that much is obvious. Maybe someone can finally explain." The female Typhorian stepped forward. "My name is Livera," she said, her voice smoother than the others. There was something warmer about it. Jake nodded. "Nice to meet you. Sorry for, whatever I did back there." Livera tilted her head, studying him. "You are not to blame. You simply spoke words that have been forbidden for thousands of cycles." Jake frowned. "Why would your beautiful be forbidden?" Zorvan's eyes narrowed. "Because it is tied to an ancient prophecy, one that speaks of great change and great destruction." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Prophecy." Livera nodded. She extended one of her 4 hands and touched the wall. The glowing surface shifted, revealing intricate carvings, symbols that pulsed with a strange golden light. "Long ago," she began, "our people were not like this. We were different, more alive." Jake listened closely as she continued. "Thousands of years ago, the Typhorians were an emotional, artistic species. They painted, sang, and loved deeply. Their exoskeletons were vibrant with colors, reflecting their moods like living rainbows. But then, a war came. A war so devastating that it nearly wiped out their civilization. At its heart was a powerful group, beings with the ability to channel pure energy through their bodies. They were called the Radiant Ones. But their power was tied to emotion. The more they felt, the stronger they became. And when anger and fear consumed them, they became unstoppable. In the end, their own power destroyed them. The Typhorians barely survived. Their leaders, terrified of repeating history, erased all emotions from their society. Beauty, passion, and love were outlawed. Over time, they changed. Their glowing colors faded. Their voices became cold and distant. Their world turned into a place of perfect logic. The prophecy warned that one day, a single phrase would awaken the radiant power once more. And Jake had just spoken it. He looked at Livera's glowing body, then back at Zorvan. "You're saying I just turned her into one of these Radiant Ones?" Livera glanced down at her hands. "The power is within me now. I can feel it, but I do not know how to control it." Zorvan's expression darkened. "That is why you must be removed. Before this power spreads." Jake stiffened. "Hold on, remove sounds a lot like eliminated. Let's not go that route." Livera took a sharp breath. Her golden glow flared brighter for a second. Zorvan stepped back. For the first time, Jake saw something new in the Typhorian leader's face. Fear. Livera looked at her hands, her voice uncertain. "I do not wish to cause harm, but I can feel it, the energy growing inside me. It is alive. Jake exhaled. This was spiraling out of control fast. He turned to Zorven. Killing her, or me, isn't going to fix this. Maybe instead of being afraid of the past, you should figure out what this power really means. Zorven's jaw tightened. The last time this power was unleashed, it nearly destroyed our world. Lyvera's glow pulsed again. The air around them crackled. She closed her eyes. The light dimmed slightly. Jake stepped forward. See, she's learning to control it. This isn't the past. Maybe this time, it doesn't have to end in destruction. For a long moment, Zorven said nothing. Then, a deep alarm rang through the halls. The guards tensed. Zorven's eyes widened. A Cyphorian soldier rushed in, bowing quickly. Chancellor, the High Order has declared Lyvera a threat. The Purists are moving to eliminate her. Jake's stomach dropped. Who the hell are the Purists? Zorven's voice was grim. A faction that believes in absolute control. They will not allow this power to exist. Lyvera's hands clenched. The glow around her flickered. Jake sighed. So, just to recap, I complimented someone, triggered a prophecy, gave her forbidden powers, and now an entire extremist group wants us dead. Lyvera's golden eyes met his. Yes. Jake shook his head. Man, I really need to stop talking. The doors slammed open. A group of Purist soldiers stormed in, weapons raised. The fight for survival had begun. A dangerous awakening. The moment the doors slammed open, Jake knew things were about to get messy. A squad of Purist soldiers stormed into the chamber, their sleek silver armor reflecting the eerie blue glow of the walls. Their weapons hummed, charged with energy, and every movement was precise, like well-trained machines. Jake instinctively stepped in front of Lyvera, raising his hands in what he hoped looked like a peaceful gesture. Whoa, hold on. Let's not start shooting, all right? The Purist commander, a tall, imposing Cyphorian with deep red markings on his exoskeleton, didn't hesitate. His voice was sharp and cold. The High Order has decreed that the radiant power must not return. The female must be eliminated immediately. Jake's stomach twisted. Eliminated. There was no trial, no discussion. They had already made up their minds. You don't have to do this, Lyvera said, stepping forward. Her voice carried something new, not fear, but authority. The golden energy pulsing in her exoskeleton made her look like something out of legend, something powerful. The commander's eyes flickered with hesitation, but then he raised his weapon. If you do not surrender, we will not hesitate to. Boom. The chamber shook as a wave of golden light exploded from Lyvera's body. The air crackled, charged with pure energy. The Purist soldiers were blown backward, crashing against the walls like ragdolls. Their weapons fizzled out, overloaded. Jake barely managed to stay on his feet. His ears rang as he turned to Lyvera. She was glowing brighter than ever. Her chest heaved as she clenched her fists, staring at her hands in shock. I didn't mean to. Jake swallowed hard. Okay, that was new. The Purist soldiers groaned, struggling to rise. Zorven, who had been watching the entire scene with wide eyes, finally spoke. It has begun. Jake turned to him. What do you mean, it? Zorven took a slow breath, his gaze locked on Lyvera. She is awakening. The radiant power is fully returning. Jake glanced at Lyvera. Her glow wasn't fading this time. It was growing. The golden waves of light pulsed with every breath she took. And then the walls began to shift. At first, it was subtle. The glowing inscriptions on the walls reacted to Lyvera's presence, lighting up with symbols that had been dormant for thousands of years. The floor vibrated beneath them. The entire structure seemed to be coming alive. Jake took a cautious step back. Is this normal? Zorven's face was unreadable. No, this has not happened for millennia. Lyvera clutched her arms. Her golden glow flickered wildly, like a fire struggling to stay contained. "I can feel something," she whispered. "Something ancient. It's inside me, calling to me." Jake knew that tone. It was the same tone a pilot got right before they blacked out from G-forces. He reached for her arm. "Leave Vera, stay with me, all right. Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out." But before she could respond, the chamber collapsed. A section of the wall exploded outward as another wave of energy burst from Livera's body. Jake barely had time to dive aside before debris rained down. The purest soldiers scrambled for cover, their earlier aggression replaced with sheer terror. Zorvan muttered something under his breath. A Cyphorian curse, Jake guessed. Livera fell to her knees, clutching her head. "It's too much. I can't control it." Jake gritted his teeth. "You have to. If you don't, this whole place is coming down." The purest commander, now pinned beneath a fallen slab of metal, struggled to speak. She is not meant to exist. She must be destroyed." Jake snapped his head toward him. "Yeah. Well, guess what? That's not happening." But the commander wasn't speaking to him anymore. He had activated a communication device. Jake's stomach dropped as he heard the words echo through the chamber. "The Radiant One has awakened. Activate the purge protocol." Zorvan's face turned to stone. "You fool," he whispered. The commander let out a weak laugh. "Better to burn the disease before it spreads." Suddenly, an alarm blared through the city, a deep droning sound that sent chills down Jake's spine. The glowing walls flashed red. Zorvan turned to Jake and Livera, his voice urgent. "We must leave. Now." Jake didn't need to be told twice. "Where's my crew?" Zorvan motioned to a nearby corridor. "They are being held in the eastern sector, but if the purge protocol has begun, we have very little time." Livera forced herself to her feet, her body still pulsing with unstable energy. "What is the purge protocol?" Zorvan's expression was grim. "A failsafe. If the radiant power ever returned, the city would be destroyed. Everything within it, wiped out." Jake felt his pulse skyrocket. "You're telling me they're gonna nuke their own city just to get rid of Livera?" "Not just Livera," Zorvan corrected. "Anyone caught within the blast radius." Jake cursed under his breath. His crew, the Typhorian civilians, they were all in danger now. He turned to Livera. "Can you control your power long enough to help us get out of here?" She met his gaze, fear and determination battling in her golden eyes. "I don't know, but I have to try." Jake nodded. That was all he needed to hear. He turned to Zorvan. "Lead the way." The ground rumbled beneath them as the city prepared for its own destruction. Time was running out. The chase begins. The city of Cypher was dying. Sirens wailed through the alien skyline as the purge protocol began. Towering buildings, sleek and metallic, pulsed with a deadly red light. Automated defenses activated, scanning the streets for targets. The air was heavy with a strange energy. Charged, alive, dangerous. Jake Carter didn't have time to admire the chaos. He sprinted through the underground corridor, his breath ragged, his heart pounding. Behind him, Livera struggled to control the raw power surging through her body. Golden light flickered around her, threatening to burst free at any moment. Zorvan ran ahead, leading the way through the twisting labyrinth beneath the city. Jake didn't trust the Typhorian chancellor, but right now, he didn't have a choice. "How much time do we have?" Jake shouted over the blaring alarms. Zorvan didn't slow down. "Less than 10 cycles." Jake didn't know what the hell that meant in human minutes, but he figured it wasn't good. The purge protocol was designed to erase the radiant power from existence. That meant wiping out Livera and anyone else caught in the blast zone. The purists didn't care about collateral damage. That included Jake's crew. He gritted his teeth. "I have to get them out." Livera let out a sharp breath, stumbling slightly. Jake caught her before she could fall. "Hey, you good?" Her golden eyes met his. "It's getting harder to hold back. The power inside me, it wants to break free." Jake exhaled. This was bad. If she lost control again, the entire city might go down before the purge protocol even activated. "Just hang in there," he said. "We're almost there." Zorgan suddenly raised a hand, signaling them to stop. The corridor opened up into a massive underground hangar. Docked inside was a Cyphorian transport ship, sleek and angular, its engines humming softly. Jake's crew was there, alive, but surrounded by armed purist guards. Jake's blood turned to ice. His team, Lieutenant Ross, Dr. Martins, and the rest, stood with their hands bound, forced to their knees. The purist soldiers had their weapons trained on them. Standing at the center of it all was a new figure, the purist general. His exoskeleton was darker than the others, almost jet black, marked with red lines that pulsed like veins. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he had already won. His cold, glowing eyes landed on Livera first. "So," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "the Radiant One appears before me." Jake clenched his fists. "Let them go." The general didn't even look at him. "It is fascinating," he continued, speaking to no one in particular. "For centuries, our kind has worked to purge the weakness of emotion. And yet, a single human's words were enough to undo it all." He turned to Jake. "Do you understand what you've done?" Jake narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, I gave someone a compliment. And now you're trying to kill us all over it." The general didn't react. "You think this is a joke, human. The radiant power is not a gift. It is a plague. It destroyed our world once. We will not let it happen again." Jake knew there was no reasoning with a fanatic. They were all the same, human or alien. "I get it," Jake said. "You're scared. You don't understand this power, so you want to wipe it out before it has a chance to prove you wrong." The general's mandibles twitched. "Fear is an emotion. I do not feel it." "Then why are your hands shaking?" Jake shot back. For a fraction of a second, the general didn't move. And that's when Jake struck. He lunged forward, grabbing the nearest purist guard's weapon and yanking it free. In the same motion, he brought his elbow up, smashing it into the soldier's face. The alien stumbled back, giving Jake just enough time to swing the weapon toward the others. "Move," Jake shouted. His crew didn't hesitate. Lieutenant Ross tackled the nearest guard, while Dr. Martinez used the distraction to free herself from her bindings. The hangar erupted into chaos. Blaster fire rained down as purist soldiers scrambled to regain control. Livera reacted on instinct. Her golden glow flared, sending out a shockwave that disarmed every purist in the room. Their weapons clattered to the ground, short-circuited by the energy pulse. Jake didn't stop to admire the effect. He grabbed Livera's hand and ran. His crew followed, diving for cover as the general roared in fury. "Stop them." More purist reinforcements poured into the hangar, but Jake and his team had already reached the transport ship. Zorven slammed his palm against the control panel, opening the hatch. "Get inside," he barked. Jake ushered his crew into the ship, keeping his weapon trained on the advancing soldiers. Livera paused at the entrance, turning to face the general. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice that carried across the entire hangar, she said, "You are afraid." The general stiffened. "I am not." Livera's golden eyes burned with something ancient. "Then why do you fight so hard to silence me?" Before he could answer, she stepped inside, and the ship's hatch sealed shut. Jake stumbled into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. "Tell me this thing is space-ready." Zorven sat beside him. Activating the thrusters, it will fly. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He gripped the controls, lifting the ship off the ground just as the purist forces opened fire. Blaster bolts struck the hull, but the ship's shields held. Jake's eyes flicked to the navigation screen. The purge protocol countdown was still active. Only 3 minutes left. He pushed the engines to full power. The ship rocketed through the underground tunnel, heading for the surface. Outside, the city was already collapsing. Skyscrapers toppled as fire and energy explosions tore through the streets. The entire capital of Cypher was tearing itself apart. Jake gritted his teeth. Come on, come on. The ship burst through the surface, breaking free into the alien sky. Behind them, the city erupted in a wave of white-hot destruction. Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had escaped. But as he looked at Livera, whose golden glow still pulsed with uncontrollable power, he knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The truth behind the prophecy. The city of Cypher was gone. From orbit, Jake Carter could still see the massive cloud of destruction where the capital once stood. The Purge Protocol had done its job, erasing everything in its path. Buildings, history, and thousands of lives, all wiped out in a single, merciless strike. Jake clenched his fists. How could they do this? The purists would rather burn their own world than face change. He had seen fanatics before, but never on this scale. Beside him, Livera stood at the ship's observation deck, staring down at her destroyed home. Her golden glow had dimmed, but her body still pulsed with residual energy, a power she didn't fully understand. Jake walked up next to her. You okay? She didn't answer right away. I should feel sadness, she said finally. But I don't know how. Jake exhaled. Your people suppressed emotions for thousands of years. It's gonna take time. She turned to him. Then why do I feel something different? Why do I feel anger? Jake didn't blame her. The purists had tried to kill her. They had destroyed her home, and all because of fear. Zorven, who had remained silent since their escape, finally spoke. We cannot stay here. The purists will not stop. They will hunt her until she is dead. Jake folded his arms. Then we find out what this power really is. We get answers. Zorven looked at him. And where do you suggest we look, human? Jake smirked. I have a few ideas. The journey to the Forbidden Archive. An hour later, the ship was moving at hyperspeed toward a distant, abandoned moon. According to Zorven, this was where the last records of the Radiant Ones were hidden, a forbidden archive buried deep beneath the surface. Jake sat in the cockpit, watching as Livera stood near the center of the ship, practicing her control over her new power. Golden light rippled across her body, flaring and fading as she tried to contain it. Her frustration was clear. It keeps escaping, she muttered. I cannot hold it back forever. Jake leaned against the wall. Maybe you're not supposed to. She turned to him. You think I should just let it consume me? Jake shrugged. I think your people made a mistake when they tried to erase this power. Maybe it's not a curse. Maybe it's a part of you. She was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. I do not know who I am anymore. Jake smiled. Welcome to the club. Before Livera could respond, the ship's alarm blared. Zorven's voice rang through the cabin. We are approaching the archive. But we are not alone. Jake rushed to the controls. The sensors showed movement on the moon's surface. Looks like someone got here before us, he muttered. Livera stepped forward. Purists. Zorven shook his head. No, something else. Jake narrowed his eyes. Guess we're about to find out. The Vault of the Lost Ones. The ship touched down on the moon's barren surface. The entrance to the Forbidden Archive was carved into a massive canyon, hidden beneath layers of rock. Jake led the way, his weapon drawn. The silence was unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath. Stay close, he muttered. Livera followed, her golden glow lighting the dark corridor as they entered the underground vault. Zorven trailed behind them, his posture tense. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Finally, they reached the central chamber. And what they found stopped them cold. The walls were covered in ancient sci-fi carvings, but unlike the cold, logical symbols of modern sci-fi, these were wild, vibrant, alive. Murals of glowing figures, their bodies pulsing with the same golden energy that Livera now carried. The radiant ones. Jake stepped forward, running his fingers over the carvings. This is it. Livera's breath hitched. My ancestors. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone pedestal. Upon it rested an ancient artifact, a crystalline sphere humming with power. Livera reached for it, but Zorven grabbed her wrist. Do not, he warned. This place is sacred. Livera frowned. We came for answers. This is where they are. Jake looked between them. What exactly is that thing? Zorven's face was grim. The last memory of the Radiant Ones. The truth revealed. Before anyone could stop her, Livera touched the artifact. A pulse of golden light erupted from the crystal. The entire chamber shook. The murals glowed to life, as if history itself was awakening. Then the visions came. Jake staggered back as a flood of images filled his mind. He saw the old Typhor, a world of color, art, and beauty. He saw the Radiant Ones, their golden energy flowing like rivers, shaping the land itself. And then he saw the war. A war unlike anything he had imagined. The Radiant Ones were not just warriors. They were gods. Their emotions fueled their abilities, and when they were afraid, their power lashed out. When they were angry, their enemies were erased from existence. The war had not been started by outsiders. It had been started by the Radiant Ones themselves. The power had consumed them. They had turned on their own people, their rage boiling into a storm that nearly destroyed the entire planet. Jake gasped as the vision faded. Livera collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Now I understand, she whispered. Jake helped her up. What did you see? Her eyes met his, glowing with the knowledge of her ancestors. We were not hunted. We were feared. Zorven's voice was grim. Now you see why this power was locked away. Livera looked down at her hands, trembling. If I lose control, I could destroy everything. A heavy silence filled the chamber. Jake took a deep breath. That's not gonna happen. She looked at him, uncertain. How do you know? He placed a hand on her shoulder. Because you're not alone in this. Livera stared at him, her expression unreadable. But for the first time, her golden glow softened. The power no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a choice. A dangerous, powerful choice, and she was ready to make it. The final battle. The moment Livera stepped away from the ancient artifact, everything changed. The walls of the Forbidden Archive rumbled, ancient symbols pulsing as if the past itself had awakened. The golden energy in her veins responded, flickering wildly across her exoskeleton. But Jake Carter had bigger problems. His communicator crackled to life. Captain, you need to get back to the ship. Now. It was Lieutenant Ross, and his voice was panicked. Jake turned to Zorven, whose normally calm demeanor had cracked. The purists have tracked us, Zorven said grimly. They are coming. Jake cursed under his breath. Of course they were. The purists weren't just hunting Livera. They were hunting history itself. Livera looked at Jake, her golden eyes burning. They mean to erase everything, don't they? Zorven nodded. If they cannot contain this power, they will bury it forever. Jake had seen this kind of thing before. Destroy what you fear. Wipe out what you don't understand. Not this time. We make our stand here, Jake said, gripping his weapon. If they want this power buried, they'll have to go through us. Livera clenched her fists. Then let them come. The purists arrive. Outside, the once barren moon had become a battlefield. Dropships cut through the dark sky, their engines roaring as they descended in formation. From their hulls, dozens of purist soldiers emerged, their armor gleaming under the faint glow of the Archive's entrance. And at the center of it all stood the purist general. Jake tightened his grip on his blaster, the same bastard who ordered the purge protocol. The general's voice echoed through the cold air. "Surrender the Radiant One. Now." Jake smirked. "Yeah, see, that's not happening." The general's expression didn't change. "Then you leave us no choice." With a single gesture, the attack began. The battle for the future. The first wave of purists charged forward, their weapons glowing with crackling energy. Jake and his team took cover behind jagged rocks, returning fire as shots whizzed past them. Lee Vera stepped forward, her golden glow intensifying. Jake grabbed her arm. "You sure about this?" She met his gaze, her expression unshakable. "This is what I was meant for." Then she raised her hands. A shockwave of golden energy erupted from her body, surging toward the enemy. The front line of purists froze mid-charge, their weapons short-circuiting. The ground beneath them cracked, sending some tumbling backward. Jake took the chance to press forward, leading his crew in a counterattack. Move, move, move. Blaster fire exploded in every direction. Zorvan fought beside them, his movements precise, efficient. He wasn't a warrior, but he was a survivor. Lee Vera moved like something out of legend. She dodged enemy fire with unnatural speed, her golden aura deflecting attacks. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a purist soldier flying into the air. Another collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by a force he couldn't comprehend. But the general wasn't impressed. He stepped forward, unaffected by the golden energy swirling around him. "You do not frighten me, Radiant One," he said, his voice cold as death. Then, with inhuman speed, he lunged. Jake barely had time to react before the general was in front of Lee Vera. With one brutal strike, he sent her flying across the battlefield. She crashed against a rock formation, the impact shaking the ground. Jake's stomach dropped. "Lee Vera," she groaned, struggling to rise. The glow around her flickered, weaker now. The general turned his glowing eyes toward her. "You do not understand this power. You are a child playing with fire." Jake had enough. He raised his blaster and fired, point blank. But the general caught the shot with his bare hand. The energy dissipated, harmless. Jake took an instinctive step back. "Okay, that's new." The general advanced. "You are a fool, human. This is not your war." Jake glared. "It is now." The general lunged again. But this time, Lee Vera was ready. Lee Vera's awakening. A golden explosion erupted from Lee Vera's body, stopping the general in his tracks. The force sent everyone, Jake, the purists, even Zorvan, reeling back. The general staggered, his armor cracking under the pressure. Lee Vera hovered above the ground now, her entire body consumed by golden flames. For the first time, the general looked afraid. "Impossible," he whispered. "The Radiant Ones could never fully control." Lee Vera's voice echoed with power. "You are wrong." She raised a hand, and the general froze midair. Jake watched in awe as Lee Vera's power wrapped around the purist leader like chains of pure light. She could end him, right now. But she didn't. Instead, she lowered her hand. The golden chains dissolved, and the general collapsed to the ground, defeated. Jake exhaled. That was intense. Lee Vera turned to the remaining purist soldiers. "This war is over. Stand down." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the purists lowered their weapons. Jake let out a breath. It was over. Zorvan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You spared him." Lee Vera nodded. "I did, because we cannot change the future by repeating the past." Jake smirked. Not bad for someone who wasn't even sure who they were an hour ago. Lee Vera looked at him, something new in her gaze, something human. "Thank you, Jake Carter, for seeing what we have forgotten." Jake scratched the back of his head. "Hey, all I did was tell you the truth." Lee Vera smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Yes, And that is why you changed everything. Jake glanced at the battlefield. The war was over. The Radiant Ones had returned. But their journey was just beginning. A new beginning. The battle was over. For the first time in thousands of years, the Radiant Ones had returned. Livera stood in the center of the battlefield, her golden energy fading back into her body. The once unstoppable power had settled, no longer chaotic, no longer overwhelming. She had finally learned to control it. Around her, purist soldiers dropped their weapons, their expressions torn between awe and disbelief. The general, once a symbol of absolute control, lay motionless, defeated, not by force, but by mercy. Jake Carter exhaled, lowering his blaster. Well, that was intense. Lieutenant Ross and the rest of the human crew emerged from behind cover, eyes wide as they surveyed the aftermath. The battlefield, once alive with violence, had fallen silent. Zorven stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. This moment will be remembered for generations. Jake smirked. Yeah. Well, I'd rather remember it with a drink in my hand. Livera turned to him, tilting her head. A drink. Jake chuckled. I'll explain later. But as the dust settled, reality came crashing back. The war may have ended here, but the galaxy wouldn't forget what happened today. The aftermath. Back on the Orion 7, Jake watched from the cockpit as their ship hovered above the ruined moon. Below, the remnants of the purist army were scattering, unsure of what came next. The old order had crumbled, but in its place, something new was being built. Livera sat beside him, silent. Jake glanced at her. What's on your mind? She didn't answer at first. Her golden eyes were distant, thoughtful. Then she said, everything has changed. Jake leaned back. Yeah, and this is just the beginning. Livera's gaze turned to him. I do not know what my people will become now. That's the beauty of it, Jake said. You get to decide. Her expression softened. For the first time, I am not afraid of that choice. Jake grinned. That's called freedom. For the first time since they met, Livera smiled. A real, genuine smile. Jake felt something stir in his chest. Something unexpected. Something dangerous. He looked away before his thoughts could go any further. So, what happens now? Zorven entered the cockpit, his posture stiff as always. Now, we make history. Jake arched an eyebrow. Care to elaborate? Zorven folded his arms. The Radiant Ones are no longer myths. The truth has been revealed. That means two things: those who will embrace it, and those who will try to destroy it. Jake nodded. So we've got more enemies coming. Inevitably. Livera looked out into space, her voice calm. Then we must be ready. Jake smirked. Oh, you're learning fast. The message to the galaxy. The next step was something no one had dared do in 1,000 years, sending a message to the entire Kyphorian race. Jake and Livera stood before the ship's communication panel, staring at the blank screen. This message would change everything. Livera took a deep breath, then pressed the transmit button. Her voice echoed through the system, reaching every Cyphorian outpost, every hidden city, every colony spread across the stars. My name is Livera. I am Cyphorian, but I am also something more. For centuries, our people have lived in fear of what we once were, but fear is not survival. It is a prison. I have seen the past. I know the truth. The Radiant Ones were not just warriors. They were creators, protectors. We were not destroyed by our power. We were destroyed by our fear of it. I will no longer be afraid. And neither should you. The age of silence is over. The age of light has begun. Come find me. Let us build a new future together. The transmission ended. A silence filled the ship. Then the responses started flooding in. Some messages were of hope. Others were of war. Jake exchanged a glance with Livera. Looks like we just started something big. She nodded. Yes, But for the first time, we are not running. Zorven folded his arms. Then I suggest we prepare. The old empire will not let this stand. Jake sighed. So, what? We're forming a rebellion now. Layvera's golden eyes gleamed. Not a rebellion. A revolution. Jake grinned. Now that's something I can get behind. The journey ahead. As the Orion 7's engines roared to life, Jake leaned back in his chair, watching the stars stretch before them. Everything had changed. The Radiant Ones were back. The Purists were still out there, planning their next move. And Lyvera, she was no longer just a lost survivor. She was something greater. Jake had a feeling that this was only the beginning of their story. As the ship leaped into hyperspace, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more interesting, and he wouldn't have it any other way.